Thomas Whitaker stood in the doorway of his home office, surveying the organized chaos that had accumulated during his latest restoration project. At 59, he had built a reputation as one of the most respected historical renovation architects in the region, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to breathe new life into structures others considered beyond saving. Papers covered his drafting table, sketches of cornices and moldings, notes on period-appropriate materials, photographs of the 1890s courthouse he was currently restoring. It was Saturday morning, and Thomas had promised himself he would organize the space before diving into the next phase of the project. He began sorting through the stacks, creating neat piles, reference materials, client correspondence, invoices. As he cleared the surface of his desk, he found Rebecca's iPad underneath a folder of paint samples. His wife must have left it there when she came in to ask him something the previous evening. Thomas picked it up, intending to return it to the kitchen where Rebecca usually kept it. As he lifted the device, the screen lit up with a notification. New message from David. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again on. Thomas froze, the partial message hanging in the air between him and the device. David. Rebecca's personal trainer, the man Thomas had encouraged her to hire 3 years ago after her minor heart scare, when her doctor had recommended a more active lifestyle. For a moment, Thomas stood perfectly still, his architect's mind automatically calculating angles and possibilities. Perhaps it was innocent. Perhaps amazing referred to a particularly effective workout session. His thumb hovered over the home button. He shouldn't invade Rebecca's privacy. In 28 years of marriage, he had never snooped through her belongings or communications. Trust had been their foundation. But the message nagged at him, like an asymmetrical detail in an otherwise balanced facade. With a deep breath, he pressed his thumb to the button and opened the messaging app. The exchange between Rebecca and David was intimate, explicit. There were photographs. Rebecca in lingerie he had never seen, David shirtless in what appeared to be a hotel room. They discussed meeting times, coordinated around Thomas's business trips. The most recent messages planned a weekend rendezvous, while Thomas would be at an architectural conference in Chicago next month. Thomas sank into his desk chair, the iPad still in his hands. His mind raced back over the past few years. Rebecca's ladies' nights, that often coincided with his out-of-town consultations. Her renewed interest in fitness and fashion. The way she had become more protective of her phone. He had been proud of her transformation, pleased that she seemed happier and more energetic after her health scare. He had never once suspected that her evolution had included betrayal. With the same precision he applied to his architectural plans, Thomas began to analyze the patterns. He checked his calendar against the dates mentioned in the messages. Every meeting between Rebecca and David aligned perfectly with times Thomas was away or working late. The coordination was so exact, it could only be deliberate. He set the iPad down carefully, as if it might explode if handled too roughly. Then he did what he always did when confronted with a structural problem. He began to draft a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas became an investigator of his own marriage. He maintained his routine, leaving for his office at the same time each morning, returning for dinner each evening, working in his home office on weekends. But beneath the familiar rhythm, he was gathering evidence. He reviewed their credit card statements, finding charges from hotels in their own city on dates he had been traveling. The Parkview Hotel appeared multiple times, always a single night, always when Thomas was out of town. He checked their home security system, comparing the timestamps of Rebecca's comings and goings with what she had told him about her schedule. The discrepancies were numerous and consistent. On days she claimed to be having lunch with her sister, the security footage showed her returning home hours later than a lunch would warrant, her hair and clothes slightly disheveled. Most disturbing was his discovery of a credit card he never knew existed. While organizing their tax documents, he found statements for an account in Rebecca's name that she had never mentioned. The charges told their own story. Lingerie shops, expensive restaurants, weekend getaways labeled as spa retreats. Thomas had always handled their major financial decisions, investments, retirement planning, the mortgage, while Rebecca managed the day-to-day expenses. This arrangement had seemed practical, given his financial acumen, but now he wondered if it had created the perfect cover for deception. On a Thursday evening, when Rebecca had told him she would be at her book club, Thomas followed her. He watched from his car as she drove not to her friend Elaine's house, where the club supposedly met, but to a small bistro downtown. David was waiting for her at an outdoor table. Thomas observed them from a distance, noting the casual intimacy of their body language, the way David's hand rested on Rebecca's, the way she leaned toward him when she laughed. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he didn't need to. Their plans for the weekend were clear enough from the messages he had continued to monitor on Rebecca's iPad, which she still occasionally left in his office, seemingly unconcerned that he might look at it. Either she trusted him implicitly not to invade her privacy, or she had grown careless in her deception. "We'll have the whole weekend while he's in Chicago," David had written. "I've already booked the cabin." "Perfect," Rebecca had replied. "He'll be completely absorbed in his conference anyway. He never notices anything beyond his blueprints." That comment had stung more than the explicit messages, more than the photographs. The dismissal of his passion, the mockery of his focus, it revealed a contempt Thomas hadn't known existed in their relationship. After gathering sufficient evidence, Thomas consulted with James Harmon, a longtime friend who practiced family law. They met for lunch at a restaurant far from Thomas's usual haunts, where they were unlikely to encounter anyone they knew. "I need some preliminary advice," Thomas said after they had ordered. "Hypothetically speaking." James raised an eyebrow. "In my experience, hypothetically speaking usually means very specifically about me." James's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "I'm sorry, Tom. How certain are you?" Thomas outlined the evidence he had gathered, the messages, the credit card statements, the security footage, his own observations. As he spoke, he maintained the same calm, analytical tone he used when presenting architectural assessments to clients. "That's comprehensive," James said when he finished. "And yes, it would constitute clear and convincing evidence of adultery in divorce proceedings, if that's the route you're considering." "I'm considering all options," Thomas replied, "but I needed to understand the legal landscape before making any decisions." James nodded. "Virginia still recognizes adultery as grounds for divorce, and it can impact spousal support and property division. But I have to ask, have you confronted Rebecca yet?" "That's probably wise. When you do confront her, be prepared for denial, then minimization, then blame shifting. It's a predictable pattern." Thomas thought of the blueprints he created for his restoration projects, the careful measurements, the precise calculations, the anticipation of structural challenges. He was approaching his marriage's collapse with the same methodical attention to detail. "One more thing," James added. "Document everything. Save those messages, those credit card statements. Make copies and keep them somewhere secure, away from your home." As they parted, James placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Whatever you decide to do, remember that this isn't a reflection on you. Rebecca's choices are her own." But as Thomas drove back to his office, he couldn't help wondering if that was entirely true. Had he been so absorbed in his work that he had failed to notice his marriage crumbling around him? Had he been restoring historical buildings while his own foundation was eroding? Thomas waited until after his daughter's medical school exams to confront Rebecca. Emma had been under enough stress preparing for her boards. He wouldn't add to it by upending her family structure during such a critical time. But once she had called with the news that she had passed with flying colors, Thomas knew it was time. He chose a Sunday evening for the confrontation. His home office seemed the appropriate setting, surrounded by the evidence of his life's work and the family photographs that had once represented what he thought was an unshakable reality. He had prepared meticulously, creating a detailed timeline of the affair with supporting documentation. The evidence was arranged chronologically in a portfolio on his desk, the kind he would use to present a restoration proposal to a client. Rebecca was in the kitchen preparing a salad for dinner when Thomas called to her. "Can you come to my office for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 54, Rebecca was still striking, her blonde hair now highlighted to cover the gray, her figure trimmed from the regular workouts with David. She wore jeans and a casual sweater, looking relaxed and at ease in the home they had shared for over 2 decades. "What is it?" she asked, her tone light. "Another problem with the courthouse restoration?" "No," Thomas said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down." Something in his voice must have alerted her that this wasn't a casual conversation. Her expression shifted slightly as she took the seat, a flicker of wariness crossing her features. For a moment she maintained her composure, her face a mask of confusion. "David? My trainer? What about him?" Thomas opened the portfolio and turned it toward her. On top was a printout of the messages he had discovered, including the photographs they had exchanged. I know you've been having an affair with him for nearly 2 years. I know about the hotels, the weekend trips, the secret credit card. I know everything. Rebecca stared at the evidence before her, her expression cycling rapidly through shock, denial, and finally, a kind of resigned defiance. You went through my private messages? She asked, her voice rising. You spied on me? I found your iPad here in my office, Thomas replied calmly. The message notification was visible on the screen. After that, yes, I investigated. Wouldn't you have done the same? Rebecca stood abruptly, pacing the small office. This is an invasion of privacy. You had no right. No right? Thomas interrupted, his calm facade cracking slightly. We've been married for 28 years, Rebecca. I thought we had built something solid together. And all this time, you've been... He gestured to the portfolio, unable to finish the sentence. It's not what you think, she said, the classic line of the caught spouse. Then what is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a deliberate, calculated betrayal. Rebecca's defiance crumbled slightly. She sank back into the chair, her eyes darting between Thomas and the evidence on the desk. You're never here, Thomas, she said finally. Even when you're physically present, you're lost in your projects, your restorations, your precious buildings. Do you have any idea how lonely that is, how invisible I've felt? So this is my fault? Thomas asked, his architect's precision now applied to the logic of her argument. Because I work hard at a career that has provided us with financial security and stability? It's not about the money. Rebecca's voice rose again. It's about connection, about feeling seen and valued. When was the last time you looked at me the way you look at one of your architectural drawings? When was the last time you were as excited about spending time with me as you are about some crumbling old building? Thomas absorbed the blow, recognizing a kernel of truth in her accusations. He had been absorbed in his work, especially in recent years, as his reputation had grown and the projects had become more prestigious. But that didn't justify what she had done. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me, he said quietly. We could have gone to counseling. We could have worked on our issues together. Why didn't you just ask for a divorce if you were so miserable? Rebecca looked away, her anger deflating. I don't know. It wasn't planned. David was attentive, interested in me as a person, not just as a wife or mother or household manager. It started as friendship, and then you started meeting in hotels while I was traveling for work. Thomas finished for her, planning weekends away together, using our money to finance your affair. I never meant to hurt you, she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. But you did, Thomas replied simply. And you kept doing it, day after day, month after month. That wasn't an accident or a momentary lapse in judgment. That was a choice you made repeatedly. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 28 years hanging between them. Outside the window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. I don't know yet, Thomas answered honestly. I need some time to think. I'm going to stay at the apartment above my studio for the weekend. You should use this time to decide what you want, Rebecca, because we can't go back to the way things were. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Rebecca remained seated, looking suddenly small and uncertain. As he packed a bag and left the house they had designed together, Thomas felt a strange sense of architectural symmetry. Their marriage had begun in his small apartment when they were young and full of dreams. Now, as those dreams lay in ruins around him, he was returning to a similar space to contemplate what might be salvaged from the wreckage. The following weeks brought a cascade of practical and emotional challenges. Thomas moved into the apartment above his studio office, a space he had originally designed as a place to work late into the night on demanding projects. Now it became his temporary home, sparse but functional, like the scaffolding that surrounds a building under renovation. He consulted with a financial advisor about protecting his assets and retirement funds. Though he had always been careful with their finances, he discovered that Rebecca had been discussing selling their custom-designed home with David. The emails he found outlined their plans to use Thomas's equity to purchase a smaller place for Rebecca while she sorted out the divorce. The discovery that they had been planning his financial dismantling while he remained oblivious was another blow. Thomas responded by documenting all their marital assets with professional precision, creating a complete inventory of what they had built together and what each had brought to the marriage. Through his professional network, Thomas discreetly inquired about David Thornton. What he learned confirmed his suspicions. David had a pattern of developing relationships with wealthy married women whose husbands traveled frequently. 2 years ago, he had been asked to leave another gym after complaints about his overly personal approach to training female clients. Thomas didn't confront David directly. That would have been beneath his dignity. Instead, he ensured that the owner of the upscale gym where David worked became aware of his trainer's ethical lapses. He did this not through accusation, but by casually mentioning to a client who served on the gym's board that he was divorcing because his wife had become involved with her personal trainer. "I believe his name is David Thornton," Thomas had replied, as if the name was an afterthought rather than the point of the conversation. Within 2 weeks, David had been let go from the gym, and several of his clients had canceled their sessions with him. The professional consequences of his personal choices were becoming apparent. Rebecca faced her own form of social reckoning. As word of their separation spread through their social circle, friends began to take sides. Many who had witnessed Thomas's dedication to Rebecca during her health scare were particularly disapproving of her betrayal. The women's charity board she had chaired for 5 years suddenly found reasons to reschedule meetings she was supposed to lead. Through it all, Thomas maintained a dignified silence in public. When asked about the separation, he simply said, "Rebecca and I are working through some personal issues," and changed the subject. He refused to engage in the kind of public character assassination that often accompanied divorces, even as he methodically prepared his legal case. His primary concern was protecting their daughter Emma from the worst of the conflict. But that became impossible when Emma arrived home unexpectedly one weekend and found her father's home office empty and his closet half bare. "Dad?" she called, finding Thomas in the kitchen where he had stopped by to collect some of his cookware. "What's going on? Where is all your stuff?" Thomas set down the box he was packing and faced his daughter. At 27, Emma had her mother's blonde hair and his analytical mind. She was in her final year of medical school, focused on becoming a surgeon, a career that required the same attention to detail that Thomas applied to his architectural work. "I've moved temporarily to the apartment above my studio," he said, gesturing for her to sit at the kitchen island. "Your mother and I are separating." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Separating? Why? What happened?" Thomas had hoped to shield Emma from the uglier details, but he wouldn't lie to her. "Your mother has been having a relationship with someone else. I discovered it a few weeks ago." "A relationship? You mean an affair?" Emma's voice rose in disbelief. "Mom cheated on you? With who?" Emma's shock gave way to anger. "David? The guy she's always talking about? The one who came to Thanksgiving last year when his family was out of town?" She shook her head, pieces falling into place. "I can't believe this. How could she do this to you? To us?" "Emma," Thomas said gently, "I understand you're upset, but this is between your mother and me. I don't want you to feel caught in the middle." "How can I not be in the middle? You're my parents." Tears welled in her eyes. "Does she know you know? Have you confronted her?" Emma wiped at her eyes angrily. "I need to talk to her. This is unbelievable." "Be careful what you say," Thomas cautioned. "Whatever has happened between us, she's still your mother. This situation is painful enough without adding to the conflict." But Emma was already pulling out her phone, her hands shaking with emotion. "I'm not going to pretend this is okay, Dad. It's not." Thomas knew he couldn't control how his daughter processed this revelation, just as he couldn't control Rebecca's choices or the unraveling of the life they had built together. All he could control was his own response to the destruction, and whether anything could be salvaged from the ruins. As summer turned to fall, the practical aspects of divorce proceeded with the same attention to detail that characterized all of Thomas's projects. The house was put on the market, the home he had designed specifically for their family, with a studio for Rebecca's painting hobby and a treehouse for Emma when she was young. Each room held memories that were now colored by the knowledge of betrayal. Thomas threw himself into his work, finding solace in the restoration of structures that, unlike his marriage, could be brought back to their former glory with enough care and expertise. The courthouse project expanded, requiring more of his time and creative energy, a welcome distraction from the dissolution of his personal life. The most difficult family gathering was Thanksgiving, which had always been celebrated at their home with extended family and friends. This year, Thomas hosted a smaller dinner at his new apartment for Emma and a few close friends. Rebecca, he heard from Emma, spent the holiday with her sister's family. She tried to bring David, Emma reported during a phone call the day after Thanksgiving. Aunt Judith told her it wasn't appropriate. There was a huge fight. "It's not your fault, Dad. I'm still so angry with her. She keeps trying to justify what she did, saying you were emotionally absent and she felt neglected. As if that makes it okay to cheat." Thomas recognized his own words echoed back to him. "Try not to let this harden you, sweetheart. Your mother's actions don't define all of who she is." It was advice Thomas struggled to follow himself. In quiet moments, when the anger subsided, he found himself mourning not just the end of his marriage, but the loss of the future he had planned. They had talked about traveling more once he semi-retired, about spending winter somewhere warm, about being grandparents together someday. Now those shared dreams were as demolished as the buildings he sometimes had to condemn when restoration proved impossible. The most unexpected support came from Rebecca's brother, Michael, who called Thomas shortly before Christmas. "I want you to know that not everyone in the family is taking Becky's side," Michael said. "What she did was wrong, plain and simple. I went through something similar with my first wife. I know how much it hurts." "Thank you," Thomas replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. "That means a lot. Will you be alone for Christmas? You're welcome to join us if you don't have plans." Thomas declined politely, explaining that he would be spending the holiday with Emma. But the invitation reinforced what he had been discovering throughout this ordeal, that family connections weren't always defined by legal or blood relationships. Some bonds remained strong even as others fractured. As the divorce proceedings continued, Thomas found himself channeling his emotions into a project he had long postponed, designing a community arts center for the historic district downtown. For years, he had sketched ideas for the abandoned warehouse space, imagining how it could be transformed into a vibrant cultural hub. But client work had always taken precedence. Now, in the evenings when his apartment felt too quiet, he worked on the arts center plans. The project became a metaphor for his own rebuilding, taking something damaged and creating something new and purposeful from it. When the city announced a competition for the arts center design, Thomas submitted his proposal. The process of presenting his vision to the selection committee reignited a passion that had been dampened by personal turmoil. When he received word that his design had been selected, the victory felt like a turning point, proof that he could still create beauty despite the wreckage of his personal life. It was at the public announcement of the Arts Center project that Thomas encountered Claire Donovan. She was standing near the architectural renderings displayed in the City Hall lobby, studying them with obvious appreciation. "The integration of the original industrial elements with the modern additions is remarkable," she commented as Thomas approached. "Whoever designed this understands that history doesn't need to be erased to create something new." She turned, surprise registering on her face. "You're the architect? Thomas Whitaker?" "Claire Donovan. I just moved back to town after 30 years away. I'm the new director of the Historical Society." Thomas recognized her name from the selection committee list. "Your comments during the presentation were insightful. You clearly understand the challenges of historical renovation." "My late husband was an architectural historian," she explained. "I absorbed quite a bit over the years." They continued discussing the project, their conversation flowing easily from architectural details to the broader impact of historical preservation on communities. Thomas found himself enjoying the exchange, the first purely pleasurable interaction he'd had in months that wasn't overshadowed by his divorce. "Would you be interested in giving a talk to our society members about the project?" Claire asked as they parted. "They would love to hear about your approach to balancing preservation with functionality." "I'd be happy to," Thomas replied. "Here's my card. Email me some potential dates." As he walked away, Thomas realized he had just made plans that had nothing to do with either work obligations or divorce proceedings. It was a small step, but a significant one. Over the following weeks, as winter settled over the city, Thomas and Claire developed a friendship based on shared interests and mutual respect. She was a widow, returned to her hometown after her husband's death to be closer to her adult children. Like Thomas, she was navigating a life different from the one she had planned. Their relationship evolved slowly, both of them cautious about new attachments. They met for coffee, to discuss the Historical Society presentation, then for dinner afterward. They attended a lecture on urban planning together, then an exhibit of historical architectural drawings at the university. "You seem different lately," Emma observed during one of their weekly dinners. Less, I don't know, weighed down. Thomas considered this. I suppose I am. The divorce will be finalized next month. The Arts Center project is moving forward. Things are settling into a new pattern. And does this new pattern include Claire Donovan? Emma asked with a knowing smile. Dad, I saw you two at the symphony last weekend. You didn't even notice me waving from across the lobby. Thomas felt a flush of embarrassment. Claire and I are friends. We share professional interests. MMHMM. Emma hummed skeptically. Well, I think it's great. You deserve to be happy, Dad. After everything Mom put you through, you deserve someone who appreciates you. The divorce was finalized in early spring, with a settlement that Thomas considered fair despite Rebecca's attempts to claim a larger portion of his retirement accounts. The judge, reviewing the evidence of adultery and Rebecca's plans to use marital assets to establish a new life with David, ruled largely in Thomas's favor. Rebecca received enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, but not the windfall she had apparently been counting on. The house, which had sold quickly despite the divorce complications, was divided according to their contributions to the mortgage and upkeep, with Thomas receiving the larger share he had earned. After signing the final papers, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The marriage that had defined half his life was officially over. The legal process that had consumed his attention for months was complete. Now he could focus fully on rebuilding. He decided to sell the apartment above his studio and design a new home for himself, something smaller than the family house, but reflective of his personal aesthetic. He purchased a piece of land overlooking the river, with mature trees and natural rock formations that would inform the design. Working on his own home became a form of therapy. Unlike client projects with their necessary compromises, this design could be purely his vision. He incorporated elements that symbolized his journey. Open spaces that flowed together rather than compartmentalized rooms, large windows that invited light, a studio space that connected to the main living area rather than being isolated, as his home office had been in the house he shared with Rebecca. As the plans took shape, Thomas invited Claire to review them over dinner at his apartment. It's beautiful, she said, studying the blueprints spread across his dining table. The way you've integrated the structure with the natural landscape is masterful. Thank you, Thomas replied, pleased by her understanding of what he was trying to achieve. It's the first time I've designed a space solely for myself. It's both liberating and a bit daunting. I understand that feeling, Claire said, looking up from the plans. After Richard died, I redecorated our bedroom. It was the first time in 30 years I'd made design decisions without considering anyone else's preferences. I painted it yellow, a color he always said was too bright for a bedroom. Absolutely, Claire laughed. It was horrible. I repainted it blue a month later, but it was my mistake to make, and that mattered. As they cleared the blueprints to make room for dinner, Thomas found himself studying Claire's face, the intelligence in her green eyes, the laugh lines that spoke of a life fully lived, the graceful way she carried herself. At 57, she possessed a quiet confidence that he found increasingly attractive. Their friendship had developed naturally over the past months, neither of them pushing for more than the other was ready to give. But as spring turned to summer and work began on Thomas's new home, he found himself wanting to share more of his life with her. The foundation is being poured next week, he mentioned as they walked along the riverfront one evening. Would you like to come see the site? It looks quite different from the plans now that the clearing has been done. I'd love to, Claire replied. It's exciting to watch a design become reality. The following weekend they stood together on what would become his front porch, looking out over the river. The concrete foundation was in place, the outline of the house now visible on the land. You can see the main living area here, Thomas explained, gesturing to the largest section of the foundation. And the studio space connects through that opening there. It's going to be wonderful, Claire said, her hand finding his as they surveyed the site. A perfect new beginning. Thomas looked down at their intertwined fingers, then back at the foundation of his new home. In his decades as an architect, he had learned that the most important part of any structure was what lay beneath the surface, the foundation that supported everything built upon it. His marriage to Rebecca had crumbled because its foundation had been compromised by deception and betrayal. But here, on this hillside overlooking the river, he was building something new, a home designed with the wisdom gained from loss, a structure that honored both his past and his future. And perhaps, he thought, as Claire's hand remained in his, he was building more than just a house. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the completed theater of the Arts Center, watching as the final lighting fixtures were installed. The renovation had transformed the abandoned warehouse into a stunning performance space that honored the building's industrial past, while creating a thoroughly modern venue for the community. "It's even more beautiful than the renderings," said a voice behind him. Thomas turned to see Claire, elegant in a blue dress for the center's opening gala that evening. "Thank you," he replied, taking her hand. "It's gratifying to see it completed." "Just like your house," she observed. "2 major projects finished in 1 year. What will you do with yourself now?" The past year had brought profound changes to his life. His divorce had been finalized, his new home completed, his professional reputation enhanced by the success of the Arts Center. Emma had graduated from medical school and begun her residency, proudly introducing Thomas to her colleagues at her white coat ceremony. Rebecca had moved to Florida with David, a distance that had actually improved her relationship with Emma, who found it easier to forgive from afar. And Thomas had found an unexpected second chance at happiness with Claire, whose understanding of loss and renewal matched his own. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared interests, rather than the passionate intensity of youth. They had both lived enough to know that lasting connections required more than initial attraction. They required honesty, communication, and the courage to be vulnerable again after being hurt. As guests began to arrive for the gala, Thomas excused himself to make a final inspection of the space. In the quiet backstage area, he paused to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The discovery of Rebecca's betrayal had seemed like an ending, the collapse of the life he had designed so carefully, and in many ways, it had been an ending. But standing in this beautifully restored building, with Claire waiting for him in the lobby and a new home to return to later, Thomas recognized that endings could also be beginnings. As an architect, he had always known that sometimes the most beautiful structures arose from the ruins of what came before. When he returned to the lobby, he found Claire chatting with Emma, who had driven in for the opening. Seeing them together, the daughter who represented his past and the woman who might be part of his future, Thomas felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with buildings or blueprints. "There you are," Claire said as he approached. "Emma was just telling me about her first solo surgery." "It was terrifying and exhilarating," Emma added. "Kind of like watching Dad go through this past year." "In a way," Emma replied thoughtfully. "Something was broken. It hurt. It needed to be addressed. And now there's healing and rebuilding." She glanced between Thomas and Claire. "And maybe some new, healthier connections." As the evening progressed, Thomas found himself repeatedly drawn to the original architectural elements he had preserved in the renovation: the exposed brick walls, the steel beams, the industrial windows. These features had witnessed the building's entire history, its construction, its years of productivity, its abandonment, and now its rebirth as something new but connected to its past. Like those elements, Thomas carried his own history: the good years with Rebecca, the joy of raising Emma, the pain of betrayal, the process of rebuilding. None of it could be erased, nor would he want it to be. Each experience had shaped him, just as each original beam and brick contributed to the character of the renovated Arts Center. After the formal presentations and the ribbon cutting, Thomas gave Claire a private tour of his favorite spaces in the building. The small reading room tucked under the mezzanine, the rooftop garden that offered views of the river, the acoustic sweet spot in the center of the theater where every note sounded perfect. "You've created something remarkable here," Claire said as they stood on the rooftop, the city lights spread before them. "Not just a beautiful building, but a space that will bring people together for generations. That's the true purpose of architecture," Thomas replied. "Not just to create structures, but to shape the experiences people have within them." "Is that what you were doing with your new house? Shaping a new experience for yourself?" Thomas considered this. "I suppose I was. Designing a space that reflected who I am now, not who I was trying to be in my marriage." Claire leaned against the rooftop railing, studying him. "And who are you now, Thomas Whitaker?" "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "But I know I'm someone who values honesty above comfort. Someone who believes in building things that last. Someone who's learned that the most important structures aren't made of brick and steel, but of trust and truth." Claire smiled, stepping closer to him. "Those sound like good blueprints for a life." As they returned to the gala, Thomas felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since the day he found Rebecca's iPad in his office. The betrayal that had ended his marriage would always be part of his story, a structural failure he hadn't anticipated. But like the most successful restorations, the rebuilding had resulted in something stronger, more authentic, and ultimately more beautiful than what had stood before. Later that evening, as Thomas showed Claire the personal living space he had designed above his studio, a space that symbolized his journey from closed rooms to open possibilities, he recognized that the architect's true skill wasn't just in creating perfect initial designs. It was in the ability to adapt when unexpected challenges arose, to find beauty in the process of rebuilding, and to create new blueprints when the original plans no longer served their purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked, noticing his momentary distraction. "I was thinking about blueprints," Thomas replied, taking her hand, "and how sometimes the most inspired designs emerge not from a blank page, but from the lessons learned when the original plans fall apart." Claire's understanding smile told him she knew exactly what he meant. As an architect, Thomas had spent his career bringing old buildings back to life. Now, he was doing the same with his own life, honoring the past while creating something new, something authentic, something built to last.